everyone. I'm so excited to be back here reading some books with you all. Tonight, we're going to be reading some Korean children's favorite stories, fables, myths, and fairy tales. This is my first time reading this book, but I'm really looking forward to it. It has beautiful artwork and some classic tales in Korea. So let's get started. Korean children's favorite stories, fables, myths, and fairy tales. Written by Kim So-hoon and illustrations by Jung Kyung-sim. Korean Children's Favorite Stories is a captivating collection of Korean folktales which are still being told, just as they have been for generations. Some are peculiar to Korea, while others echo those told in other countries. Written with wit and pathos, they unveil the inevitable foibles of people everywhere and expose the human-like qualities of animals and the animal-like qualities of humans. Pulsating with the rhythm of life and the seasons, the stories transport the reader to a wonderland where ants talk, a baby rabbit outwits a tiger, a tree fathers a child, and a toad saves a whole village. This collection of traditional tales is sure to delight the hearts of all children from 8 to 80. I really like the illustrations. Stories do not like to be hoarded. They like to be told and retold again and again, passing always from lip to lip. I have selected and retold here a number of Korean folk stories that have been handed down by word of mouth from one generation to the next. These These are stories that have been told by grandparents to their grandchildren, huddled on the heated floors of Korean homes in the dead of winter, with the cold winds raging outside. These are stories repeated in the yards of Korean homes to children seated on straw mats in the cool of a summer evening. Smoke from mosquito coils whirling about their faces. These are the tales recounted with great merriment by farming folk as they rest from their work in the shade of a nearby tree. These are stories which Korean children of countless generations have wept and laughed over. They reveal the inevitable foibles of people everywhere and expose the human-like qualities of animals and the animal-like qualities of humans. In these stories, ants talk, a baby rabbit outwits a tiger, a tree fathers a child, and a toad saves an entire village. They reflect the serenity of men and women nurtured by the ancient land of Korea. Here can be found stories which echo those told in other countries throughout the world, but also many stories that are peculiar to Korea. These stories were first heard in my childhood in Korea. I hope they will use their magic powers to rise above all language barriers and speak directly to the hearts of all children between the ages of 8 and 80 in other lands. Kim So-eun. The story bag. There once lived a very rich family. They had only one child, a boy, who loved to have stories told to him. Whenever he met a new person, he would say, "Tell me another different story." And each time he would store away the story he heard in a small bag he carried on his belt. So many stories did he hear that soon the bag was packed tight, and he had to push hard to get each new story in. Then, to make sure that none of the stories escaped, he kept the bag tied tightly at the mouth. The boy eventually grew into a handsome young man. The time came for him to take a wife. A bride was chosen for him, and the whole house was preparing to greet the young master's new wife. Everything was in an uproar. Now, there happened to be in this rich home a faithful old servant who had been with the family ever since the time when the story-loving boy was still very young. As the household was preparing for the young master's wedding, this servant was tending a fire on the kitchen hearth. Suddenly, his ears caught faint whispering sounds coming from somewhere. He listened carefully and soon discovered that the voices were coming from a bag hanging on the wall. It was the bag of stories which the young master had kept in his childhood. Now it hung forgotten on an old nail on the kitchen wall. The old servant listened carefully. "Listen, everyone," said a voice. "The boy's wedding is to take place tomorrow. He has kept us this long while stuffed in this bag, packed so closely and uncomfortably together. We have suffered for a long time. We must make him pay for this some way or another." "Yes," said another voice. "I have been thinking the same thing. Tomorrow, the young man will leave by horse to bring home his bride. I shall change into bright red berries ripening by the roadside. There, I shall wait for him. I shall be poisonous, but shall look so beautiful that he will want to eat me. And if he does, I shall kill him. And if he doesn't die after eating the berries," piped up a third voice, "I shall become a clear, bubbling spring by the roadside. I shall have a beautiful gourd dipper floating in me. When he sees me, he will feel thirsty and will drink me. But when I get inside him, I shall make him suffer terribly." A fourth voice then broke in. "If you fail, then I shall become an iron skewer, heated red hot, and I shall hide in the bag of chaff that will be placed by his horse for him to dismount on when he reaches his bride's home. And when he steps on me, I shall burn his feet badly. Because, you see, according to the custom of the land in those days, a bag of chaff was always placed by the bridegroom's horse so that he would not have to step directly on the ground. Then a fifth voice whispered, "If that fails too, I shall become those poisonous string snakes, thin as threads. Then I shall hide in the bridal chamber. When the bride and the bridegroom have gone to sleep, I shall come out and bite them." The servant was filled with alarm by what he heard. "This is terrible," he told himself. "I must not let any harm come to the young master. When he leaves the house tomorrow, I must take the bridle and lead his horse myself." Early the next morning, the final preparations were completed, and the wedding process was ready to set forth. The groom, dressed in his best, came out of the house and mounted his horse. Suddenly, the faithful servant came running out and grabbed the horse's bridle. He then asked to be allowed to lead the horse. The old master of the house said, "You have other work to do. You had better stay behind." "But I must lead the horse today," the servant said. "I don't care what happens, but I insist that I take the bridle." He refused to listen to anyone, and finally, the master, surprised at the old man's obstinacy, allowed him to lead the horse to the bride's home. as the procession wound along its way, the bridegroom came to an open field. There, by the roadside, many bright berries were growing. They looked temptingly delicious. "Wait," the bridegroom called out. "Stop the horse and pick me some of those big juicy berries." However, the servant would not stop. In fact, he purposely made the horse hurry on and said, "Oh, those berries, you can find them anywhere. Just be a little patient. I shall pick some for you later." And he gave the horse a good crack of the whip. After a while, they came to a bubbling spring. Its clear waters seemed cool and tempting. There was even a small gourd dipper floating on the water, as if to invite the passerby to have a drink. "Bring me some of that water," the bridegroom said to the servant. "I've been thirsty for some time." But again, the servant prodded the horse and hurried by. "Once we get into the shade of those trees, your thirst will soon disappear," he said, and he gave the horse another crack of the whip, a blow much harder than the first one. The bridegroom grumbled and mumbled from the top of his horse. He was in a very bad mood, but the servant took no notice. He only made the horse go faster. Soon they reached the bride's home. There, already gathered in the yard, was a large crowd of people. The servant led the horse into the compound and stopped it beside the waiting bag of chaff. As the bridegroom put down his foot to dismount, the servant pretended to stumble and shoved the bridegroom to keep him from stepping on the bag. The bridegroom fell to the straw mats laid on the ground. He blushed in shame at his clumsy fall. However, he could not scold the servant in front of all the people. So he kept silent and entered the bride's home. There, the wedding ceremony was held without untoward incident, and the newly married couple returned to the groom's home. Soon, night fell, and the bride and bridegroom retired to their room. The faithful servant armed himself with sword and hid himself under the veranda outside the bridal chamber. As soon as the bridegroom and bride turned out the lights and went to bed, the servant opened the door of the room and leapt inside. The newlywed couple were startled beyond description. "Who's there?" they both shouted, jumping out of bed. "Young master," the servant said, "I shall explain later. Right now, just hurry and get out of the way." The servant kicked the bedding aside and lifted the mattress. A terrible sight greeted their eyes. There, hundreds of string snakes coiled and writhed in a single ball. The servant slashed at the snakes with the sword in his hand. As he cut some into pieces, they opened their red mouths and darted their black forked tongues at him. Other snakes slithered here and there, trying to escape the servant's flashing sword. The servant whirled here and there like a madman and finally killed every one of the snakes in the room. Then He let out a great sigh of relief and began to say, "Young master, this is the story." And the old servant recounted all the whispers that he had heard coming from the old bag on the kitchen wall. That is why, when stories are heard, they must never be stored away to become mean and spiteful, but must always be shared with other people. In this way, they are passed from one person to another, so that as many people as possible can enjoy them. The end. The Pheasant, the Dove, and the Magpie. There once lived in the same forest a pheasant, a dove, and a magpie. One year the crops failed, and there was nothing for the three of them to eat. What shall we do? How can we live through this cold winter? The three talked over their problems and finally decided to call on a mouse who also lived in the same forest. "Surely," they said, "the mouse will have some rice and will share it with us." They decided that the pheasant would go first to see the mouse. The pheasant was always a proud bird, until then had looked down on the lowly mouse. So, when he came to the home of the mouse, he spoke rudely out of habit. "Hey there," the pheasant said haughtily. "Where are you? This is the great pheasant. Bring me some food." Very nice. Mrs. Mouse was in the kitchen at the back of the house, feeding fuel to her kitchen stove. When she heard the disdainful words of the pheasant, she became very angry. She flew out of the kitchen, a red-hot poker in her hand, and began hitting the pheasant on both his cheeks. "What's the idea of speaking in such a manner when you have come begging for food? Even if we had rice to throw away, we wouldn't give you any." Rubbing his red and swollen cheeks, the pheasant ran home in great shame. That is why, to this day, the pheasant's cheeks are red. Next, the dove went to the mouse's home. He too was a very proud bird and looked down on the mouse. "Say, you rice thief, I've come for a bit of food," he said in a rude and haughty manner. Mrs. Mouse became angry again when she heard the dove speak so rudely. She ran out of her kitchen with a poker in her hand and hit the dove a good blow on top of his head. Ever since then, the top of a dove's head has always been blue. It is the bruise that was caused by Mrs. Mouse and her poker. Lastly, the magpie went to get some food. The magpie knew too well what had happened to his two friends, the pheasant and the dove. He did not want to repeat their mistakes, so he decided to be very, very careful how he spoke. As soon as he reached the front door of Mr. Mouse's home, he bowed humbly and spoke as politely as possible. "My dear Mr. Mouse," he said, We have had an extremely poor harvest, and I am hungry. Can you not spare me a little food?" Mr. Mouse came to the front door. "Well, Mr. Magpie, I won't say I shan't give you anything. But aren't you a crony of the pheasant and the dove? If you are, I will certainly have nothing to do with you." "Oh no, Mr. Mouse," said the magpie. "Absolutely not. I've never even heard of them." "In that case, come in," the mouse said, believing what the magpie had told him. The mouse then gave the magpie some rice to take. On top of all of this, Mrs. Mouse, her good mood restored, said, "Mr. Magpie, you certainly are a refined gentleman. Even your language is different from the rest. You must have had a very good upbringing." And so, to this day, the magpie is known for his cunning and slyness. The end. Next up, the bridegroom's shopping. Away in the country, there once lived a long-established family of farmers. There was an only daughter in the family who had just married. As is the custom in such cases, the bridegroom came to live with his in-laws, for he was to continue the family name. A few days after the marriage, it so happened that the bridegroom had to go to town on some business. As he prepared to leave, his bride asked him, "Will you please buy me a comb in town?" "Why, of course," he answered, all eager to please his pretty bride. However, his wife knew that her husband was a very forgetful man. Hadn't both her mother-in-law and father-in-law told her so? As she was wondering how he could be made to remember, she chanced to look at the sky. There was a new moon, a thin crescent of pale light shining softly in the sky. It was only 3 days old, and it looked just like the moon-shaped comb she wanted. "There," she called to her husband. "Look at the moon. Doesn't it look just like a comb? If you forget what you must buy, just remember to look into the sky. The moon will remind you that I want a comb. You will remember, won't you?" This she repeated again and again, and after she was sure that he would remember, she said goodbye to him. The bridegroom was soon in town. He was so taken up with his business that he completely forgot about his wife's comb. Several days later, his work finished, he packed his belongings and prepared to return home. As he looked around to see if he had forgotten anything, he happened to look out the window, and there he saw a big, round moon shining in the sky. 10 days had passed since he had left home. The moon was no longer a small sliver of light, but a round, laughing globe of silver. The moon suddenly reminded him of his wife's parting words. "Oh, I almost forgot," he told himself. "There was something like the moon I had to buy for my wife. Now I wonder what it was." Try as he might, he could not remember. He knew that it had something to do with the moon, but what? His memory was a blank. Was it something round, like the moon? He asked himself. Or was it something that shone like the moon? But not for the life of him could he recall what it was. "Well," he said at last, "I might as well go to a shop and ask for help." So the young farmer entered a shop and said, "Good day, Mr. Shopkeeper. Please give me something that looks like the moon, something a woman uses." The shopkeeper laughed at this strange request. Then he looked around at the goods on his shelf, and his eyes lighted on a small, round hand mirror. "Oh, I know," the shopkeeper said. "This must be what you want. Look, it's round, and it looks just like the full moon. You look into it, and you can see yourself. A young bride would want it when she pretties herself. I am sure it could be nothing else." Now, the bridegroom had never seen a mirror before, as they were very rare then. But he thought that surely his wife, the daughter of a rich old farming family, would know what it was. "Yes, this must be what my wife was asking me to get," he answered, proud that he could get what his wife wanted. Soon he was back home in the country again. As soon as he entered the house, his wife asked, "Did you remember to do my shopping for me?" "Yes," he answered. "Here," and he handed her what he had bought. The bride, expecting to receive a comb, wondered at the strange round object that her husband had handed her. She peered into the smooth glass, and what should she see there but the reflection of a young woman, and a very pretty woman at that. "What thing is this?" she cried. "I only asked for a comb, and here you bring home a pretty young woman." The wife turned angrily and ran to her mother. "Mother, can you imagine anything so silly? I asked my husband to buy me a comb, and look what he brought home. A strange young woman." Where is she?" the mother asked, taking the mirror and peering into it. Of course, the mother saw reflected only the face of a wrinkled old woman. "Why, my child," she said, "what are you talking about? This must be an old relative of ours from a neighboring village." "No, you are wrong. It's a young woman," the young wife cried. "No, it's you who are wrong. Look, she's an old, wrinkled woman," the mother retorted angrily. Thus, the two began quarreling. Just then, a small boy came into the room, eating a rice cake. The boy picked up the mirror and peered into it. There, he saw another boy eating a rice cake. The boy thought the stranger had taken his. "Give me back my rice cake," he shouted. "It's mine." He threw up his hand to strike the boy, but the boy in the mirror also raised his arm. The bewildered child, scared by what he saw, began to cry loudly. The room was filled with the the two women arguing away at the top of their voices, and the boy crying his head off. Just then, the grandfather passed by and heard the commotion. Wondering what it was all about, he poked his head in the doorway. "What's going on here? What's the matter?" he asked. Then he caught sight of the boy looking at a round object and crying, "Give me back my rice cake." The grandfather flared with anger to think that someone or something should have taken rice cakes from a small boy. Where?" he asked. "Show me the thief." He grabbed the mirror and peered into it. There, staring at him, was a fierce-looking old man, anger written all over his face. "Why, it's an old man. You ought to be ashamed at your age to jump out and interfere in a quarrel between boys." With these words, the grandfather rolled up his sleeves and was about to hit the old man in the mirror. Suddenly, the mirror slipped from his hand and fell to the floor with a loud crash. The grandfather, the boy, the two women, and the bridegroom all fell silent and stood staring dumbly at hundreds of pieces of broken glass beneath their feet. The end. The bad tiger. Let's do at least one more. In a great forest, there once lived a very bad tiger. Every night, he would come out of his lair and steal into a radish patch kept by a poor old woman. There, the bad tiger would trample all over the garden, eating the choicest and fattest radishes. The poor woman came every morning to her radish patch and cried at the damage caused by the bad tiger. But she didn't know what to do, for the tiger was as strong as he was bad. She wondered and wondered how she could stop the tiger from eating her radishes every night. Finally, she hit upon a good plan. One day, she met the tiger and said, "Mr. Tiger, why do you have to eat all the radishes all the time? Please come to my house, and I shall make you some delicious, nourishing red bean gruel." The tiger was overjoyed at the prospect of a red bean gruel, for it was his favorite dish. "Thank you. I shall be over tonight," he said, licking his lips at the thought of the feast. The old woman hurried home to prepare for the arrival of the bad tiger. First, she lit a fire and heated up a large amount of charcoal. She put the glowing coals in a brazier? I don't know. And took the brazier outside to the back of her home. Then she floated some red-hot cayenne pepper on the water in her kitchen water jug. Next, she stuck a large number of needles in the kitchen towel. She then scattered cow dung all around the kitchen door and spread a large straw mat used in drying unhulled rice out in the yard. Finally, she brought out an A-frame used on the back when carrying heavy loads, and so called because it is shaped like the letter A turned upside down. She propped the A-frame up against the back fence. Now, everything was ready. The old woman went back to her kitchen and pretended she was preparing the evening dinner. Soon it was dark, and the bad tiger came sneaking to her house. The old woman heard the tiger outside and said, "Oh, it's you, Mr. Tiger. Please do come in." And she opened the front door, smiling her welcome at the tiger. "My, it's a cold night tonight, isn't it, Mr. Tiger?" she said. "You won't mind, will you, bringing the charcoal brazier into the house from the back for me?" "Of course," the bad tiger said, for he was in a good mood thinking of the feast he was about to have. He went out back and was about to lift the brazier up when he noticed that the charcoal was almost out. "Say, old woman, the charcoal is almost out. There are hardly any red embers left." The old woman answered from inside the house, "Is that so? Will you blow the embers for me? The charcoal will soon become red." The bad tiger put his nose to the brazier and puffed and puffed. He blew so hard that some ashes whirled up and dropped into his eyes. The bad tiger hurriedly rubbed his eyes, but the more he rubbed, the more they hurt. In pain, the bad tiger cried, old woman, I've got some ashes in my eyes. Help me." "Oh dear, I'm sorry," she said. "Try washing your eyes with water. You'll find some in the kitchen jug there." The tiger did as he was told, but as you will remember, the old woman had floated some red pepper on the water. The pepper got in both the tiger's eyes, and he was in greater pain than before. He thought he would surely go blind. Old woman, he called. "My eyes are worse than before. What can I do?" Then, oh, the bad tiger moaned, pressing his eyes with his front paws and stamping his feet in pain. "Oh, is that painful? Try wiping them with this kitchen towel." The bad tiger was in great pain. He grabbed the towel she handed him and began rubbing his eyes frantically. But the needles in the towel pricked his eyes. Now the bad tiger became truly mad with pain. Suddenly, the bad tiger realized how he had been tricked by the old woman. Blindly, he tried to run away. But as soon as he stepped out the kitchen door, he slipped on the cow dung and fell head over heels on the ground. The straw mat, which the old woman had laid out in the backyard, saw all of this and came flying through the air. It quickly wrapped the bad tiger in an incredible tight roll. Next, the A-frame came trotting out from the back fence and threw the tightly wrapped tiger on its back. Then, without a word, the old woman put the frame on her back, went right down to the sea, and threw the bad tiger headlong into the waves. That was the end of the bad tiger. Thereafter, the old woman was able to raise her radishes in peace. And there was no longer a bad tiger to come and dig up her radish patch. The end. Thank you so much for joining me with these stories. I really hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you're drifting off to sleep and have a lovely night. Sweet dreams.